The moment Lucy disarmed the raging biker leader at the produce stand remains the most heart-stopping scene of all. Who would have guessed a quiet, plump farmer's wife could move like lightning and disable a weapon before anyone could blink? That electrifying standoff shook the entire town to its core, but it also revealed Lucy's hidden Navy SEAL past to everyone. If you've been following this incredible saga, be sure to stay tuned until the very end, because what happens after that jaw-dropping confrontation is just as thrilling. Your support keeps these stories coming. If you haven't done so yet, tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss out on the next twist in Lucy's journey or any of the other amazing tales we'll bring you soon. Trust me, the best is yet to come. Lucy Davids had always been a private person. When she and her husband, Peter, first rolled into the farming community of Hollow Creek 5 years ago, they had come in search of peace and simplicity. Hollow Creek, nestled between gentle hills and bordered by a winding river, offered the postcard version of rural life. Friendly neighbors, modest homes, and an old-fashioned market every Wednesday. Lucy, whose sturdy frame and warm smile made her seem like the quintessential farmer's wife, had quietly integrated herself into the community. Each morning, she would set up a produce stand at the weekly market with the fruits and vegetables that Peter grew in their small fields. Locals flocked to the David stand for everything from heirloom tomatoes to sweet corn, praising Lucy for her polite conversation and her famous pickled beets. Children often tugged at her apron, asking for a free sample of something sweet. She never denied them. No one suspected that Lucy had once been Lieutenant Commander Lucille Davids of an elite Navy Special Operations Unit. No one in Hollow Creek had any inkling that the kindly woman who wore a worn apron and gardening gloves had served multiple tours in Afghanistan, undertaking perilous missions deep behind enemy lines. They saw only Lucy Davids, the pleasant, heavy-set farmer's wife, who always remembered birthdays and offered up a smile. Her past, the dusty Afghan roads and the tense hush of clandestine missions, was neatly concealed behind laughter and recipes. Only Peter knew the bare bones of her story, that she had been in the Navy, that something classified had happened during her third tour, and that she had chosen to leave that life behind. But even he did not know the full depth of her experiences, the sleepless nights and the nightmares that still woke her in a cold sweat. Hollow Creek offered Lucy the quiet she craved. Its residents thought they knew her, a woman who guarded her privacy a bit more than most, but who always pitched in for local fundraisers and never missed a chance to help bake for the church social. Ms. Crisp, an elderly neighbor, often told Lucy how lucky the town was to have someone so diligent and friendly. "You're like the backbone of this market, dear," she would say, tapping her cane for emphasis. In truth, Lucy's precise, almost methodical way of arranging vegetables stemmed from habits forged during elite training, where a mere half-inch difference could mark success or calamity. She had learned in that former life to see any public place as a potential battlefield, a place where vigilance could be the difference between life and death. Peter, by contrast, was everything Lucy was not: tall, lean, and filled with the plain optimism that came from a life spent nurturing the soil. Whereas Lucy always had an eye on exits and vantage points, Peter had his mind on weather forecasts and pH levels in the irrigation system. They made a complementary team. Lucy, with her sharper edges, had softened in Peter's presence, finding in him an unwavering kindness that smoothed over her rough memories. She cherished the strong calluses on his hands, from hours spent with tillers and hoes, the gentle way he would check on neighbors with the same sense of responsibility that he gave to his crops. At first, Lucy could scarcely believe how well Hollow Creek embraced them. Even though she held her past close to the vest, Lucy felt a sense of belonging she had never known in her itinerant military career. She volunteered at the food pantry and, in subtle ways, she introduced ideas that made the little town safer. She suggested reorganizing the weekly market so that aisles were wider and stalls neatly arranged, a detail that served both aesthetics and security, though no one realized the latter. She recommended that certain volunteers be trained in rudimentary first aid, explaining that accidents happened all the time on farms. It was enough to plant the seeds of preparedness in a place that took its peaceful existence for granted. One bright Wednesday morning, as Lucy finished stacking baskets of bell peppers and cucumbers, She noticed a distant rumble that was decidedly out of place in sleepy Hollow Creek. Peter, good-naturedly oblivious to the nuances of engine noises, went about greeting the local crowd. But Lucy's senses went on full alert. From years of experience, she could distinguish between the casual growl of passing touring bikes and the provocative roar of motorcycles meant to intimidate. This was not just a group of weekend riders. Lucy spotted a column of them cresting the hill at the entrance to the main street. At least 9 or 10 wearing matching vests with a logo, a snarling wolf's head, emblazoned on the back. She'd seen groups like these before, in foreign territory, but the purpose was always the same: to display dominance. The lead biker was a grizzled man the rest called Blade, wearing a vest with Rogue Riders stitched across it. Lucy observed how the bike swerved into the market's makeshift parking area, blocking one of the primary exits. Inside the square, chatter died down. Parents drew kids closer. Some vendors started furtively packing up. Lucy sensed immediate tension. Whatever the riders wanted, it wasn't likely to be benevolent. With an instinct honed over years of stealth operations, Lucy surreptitiously scanned her surroundings. She pinpointed anything that could serve as a makeshift weapon: a cast iron produce scale, a nearby broom, and the folding tables themselves. Force, she reminded herself, was always a last resort. But if things escalated, she needed to know her options. Peter, as always, took the first approach of kindness, offering them produce samples and a wide smile. He genuinely believed in the goodness of people. Lucy both loved and worried about that trait. She had been taught to assume the worst in potential adversaries. The bikers radiated menace, especially Blade, who wore a patch that proclaimed him the president of the Rogue Riders. His second, an equally tough-looking individual named Gordo, had a bored expression as if spoiling for a fight just to ease his mood. Lucy overheard Blade telling another vendor, "Heard this market's got the best stuff in the county. Thought we'd see for ourselves." His tone was loud enough for everyone to hear, the words innocuous but the manner threatening. Lucy noticed him eyeing her figure with a sneer, as if searching for a target to humiliate. The fact that she carried extra weight was something she'd grown used to. She was strong beneath it, but bullies rarely saw anything beyond the surface. Blade and Gordo wove through the stalls, barking remarks at female vendors, knocking over items just enough to aggravate without triggering an immediate police response. Lucy spotted Deputy Winslow at the far end of the street, a young officer with insufficient experience to handle a rowdy biker gang alone. The tension thickened. Lucy caught Miss Crisp's eyes from across the aisle. The elderly woman looked frightened, but also wore a knowing glint. Miss Crisp, who had once hinted that Lucy's eyes reminded her of a certain soldier she'd known decades ago, seemed to suspect Lucy had deeper wells of capability than she let on. Blade and his crew eventually zeroed in on Lucy's stand. "What's a big girl like you doing to running a produce stand?" Blade said, stepping far too close into Lucy's personal space. His voice carried across the hush, letting everyone know he meant to pick a target. "Looks like you eat more than you sell, huh?" A couple of his men snickered behind him, fueling the brazen performance. Lucy felt her pulse quicken, not in fear, but in that controlled readiness that once steadied her hands during high-risk missions. She smiled politely, a technique from her undercover days to lull aggressors. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Peter shift uncomfortably, uncertain whether to step in or call for help. "Afraid you're mistaken," Lucy said calmly, looking Blade straight in the eye. "We're just hard-working folks here, trying to sell fresh produce." Her tone suggested neutrality, but her posture had subtly changed. Her feet were firmly planted, balanced as though she could pivot instantly if threatened. Inside, she battled the question of whether to reveal her background or attempt to diffuse the situation through quiet diplomacy. Memories of past conflicts, from dusty Middle Eastern roads to hidden mountain enclaves, flitted through her mind. She remembered the cardinal rule: avoid escalation unless absolutely necessary. But bullies thrive on perceived weakness. Blade picked up a bright red tomato from her display, spun it in his hand as though considering buying it, then let it drop to the ground, squashing it under his boot heel. "Oops," he said, feigning an apology. "Didn't mean to ruin your precious display." Lucy saw the next move coming before he even shifted his weight. He was about to grab her by the arm, maybe to shove her around and see if she'd squeal in fright. She braced herself. That was when Ms. Crisp interjected. "You leave that lady be," she said, her tremulous voice cutting through the tension. But Blade merely laughed. "Old woman, mind your business before you break a hip." His men snickered, scanning the crowd for any threat. They likely expected the local sheriff to show up, but Sheriff Granger was out of town at a conference. They only had the inexperienced Deputy Winslow to contend with, and he stood by the far edge of the market, hand nervously hovering near his holster. Lucy realized that if this went on, someone innocent was going to get hurt. She glanced at Peter. He gave her a tiny nod, part confusion, part acceptance. He'd seen that look in Lucy's eyes before, the look of quiet command, which he couldn't fully understand but had learned to trust. "Peter, you see," Lucy said softly, "why don't you help Miss Crisp get her groceries together?" It wasn't a suggestion. It was more like an order, one from the part of Lucy that rarely showed itself. Peter opened his mouth to protest but saw something in his wife's gaze that made him obey without question. Blade smirked. "Sending hubby away so we can have some one-on-one time?" he taunted. His men circled the produce stand, forming a semicircle that cut Lucy off from the rest of the market. She noticed other vendors hurriedly packing up, trying to avoid trouble. Still others stood rooted, uncertain whether to intervene or run. The whole square had gone silent. The only sounds the creaking of old metal signposts and the distant hum of a lone air conditioner. Lucy raised her eyes, meeting Blade's gaze without a trace of fear. "I'm asking you to leave," she said clearly. "This community doesn't welcome harassment." Blade let out a derisive laugh, then lunged forward. Time seemed to slow for Lucy, a phenomenon she remembered vividly from her service days. In her peripheral vision, she mapped each biker's position, each potential improvised weapon. If she stayed still, she would be manhandled by Blade to amuse his men. If she resisted, the group might unleash violence on the entire market. In that flicker of a moment, Lucy made the decision she'd tried to avoid for 5 years, to reveal a fragment of what she was truly capable of. Blade's hand shot out to grab her arm. Instead, Lucy sidestepped with lethal grace, hooking her foot behind his ankle while deflecting his reach. Blade crashed to the ground, more from surprise than force. She had used minimal effort, the sort of move taught in advanced combatives training. A hush fell over the market. No one expected the heavy-set farmer's wife to be so swift, least of all Blade and his men. "You're going to regret that," spat Gordo, stepping forward with a curled fist. He aimed a punch at Lucy's midsection, but she effortlessly pivoted, caught his forearm, and guided him face first into the edge of the stand. The crate of bell peppers tumbled, but Lucy's hold never wavered. The crowd gasped. A few recognized what they were seeing as something well beyond the typical self-defense class. Deputy Winslow started to move in, but Lucy caught his eyes and gave a slight shake of her head, nonverbal for "stand down, you're out of your league." She didn't want stray bullets or an inexperienced deputy escalating the chaos. Two more bikers rushed her. Lucy's muscle memory, rooted in thousands of hours of close-quarters battle training, took over. She disarmed one who was swinging a chain, flipping him onto his back. The other tried to grapple her, but she twisted free and used his momentum to send him stumbling into a table of baked goods. All the while, Lucy's breath remained calm, her focus unbroken. She knew exactly how to neutralize threats quickly, even if her outward appearance suggested a life of quiet domesticity. By now, Blade had scrambled back to his feet, fury bright in his eyes. He snatched a concealed firearm from his vest, a short-barreled revolver that glinted ominously in the mid-morning sun. Gasps and screams erupted from the onlookers. Lucy's first instinct was to protect the civilians. She had not intended to fully reveal the extent of her training, but now it was unavoidable. She seized the split-second advantage of Blade's shaky aim. In a blink, she closed the gap, knocked his arm upward, and dislodged the weapon. It clattered to the ground, and Lucy expertly kicked it aside. The entire market seemed to stand still, as if time itself was holding its breath. Some of Blade's men lay groaning on the ground, others hesitated, uncertain whether to charge Lucy again or cut their losses. Lucy squared her shoulders. The anger in her voice was tempered by a deep-seated sense of duty. "Leave," she commanded, and the word reverberated. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Blade stared, confusion flashing through his rage. This was not the easy pickings he had envisioned, harassing a sleepy market. Who was this woman? The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Lucy recognized it from countless missions when the enemy suddenly realized they were outmatched. One of his battered men scrambled to retrieve the fallen revolver, but Lucy placed her foot on it. I said, leave, she repeated, unwavering. Her posture, the crisp authority in her tone, and the fact she had incapacitated several of his men in under a minute, finally cracked Blade's bravado. A low, snarling sound escaped his throat as he weighed his options. A full-on confrontation that could end in catastrophe or retreat. Let's go, he barked to the remaining conscious riders. They gathered their injured, hurling threats and backtracked to their bikes. Engines roared to life, and within moments, the rogue riders left the square under a cloud of their own humiliation. Only then did Lucy feel the rush of adrenaline ebb. Her senses flooded with the reality of what had happened. She turned around to see the entire market gaping at her. Ms. Crisp stood with her cane, mouth slightly open, while Peter looked torn between awe and concern. Deputy Winslow finally approached, radioing for backup, but even he seemed rattled to his core by the skill he had witnessed. Lucy's mind whirled with worries. She had revealed far more of her background than she'd ever intended. The question now was, how would the people of Hollow Creek react? Peter was the first to break the silence. Lucy, how did you? His voice trailed off, heavy with shock. She took a moment, glancing at the bruised bikers stumbling to their motorcycles, at the stunned crowd, at Miss Crisp's trembling yet resolute form. Then Lucy cleared her throat. The skills she had used were second nature, but the explanation would not be so simple. There's something I need to tell everyone, she said, her voice cracking slightly despite years of calm battlefield leadership. But not here, not now. Let's take care of each other first. Vendors slowly picked up scattered produce and overturned tables. Amid the confusion, Miss Crisp hobbled over, placing a gentle hand on Lucy's forearm. Dear, she said softly, I suspected something from the moment I met you. My late husband used to say you can spot a soldier by how they watch doors, how they stand. Her thin lips curled in a smile that was both kind and sad. I won't pry, but I will thank you. You saved us all today. Lucy nodded, her heart constricting. She knew the code of older veterans, the unspoken acknowledgement of those who served. Ms. Crisp likely understood that Lucy had been more than a mere soldier. Lucy swallowed hard. She had dreaded this day for 5 years, hoping no one would ever see the lethal side of her. Now everyone had seen it, and there was no going back. Deputy Winslow carefully picked up the scattered revolver. By the time he turned to face Lucy, he had forced composure back into his features. Mrs. Davids, he asked, using her married name as though anchoring himself to the reality that she was still just Lucy from the market. I've got to file a report. I'll need a statement about what happened here. Lucy exhaled. She was used to writing after-action reports for the Navy, but those had always been classified. This was going to be new territory. News of the incident traveled through Hollow Creek faster than a spring storm rolling down the valley. By the next day, Lucy's phone rang off the hook, and curious neighbors dropped by with questions masked as friendly visits. Word had spread that Lucy Davids, the unassuming farmer's wife, had single-handedly taken on a gang of bikers calling themselves the Rogue Riders. Rumors swirled. Some claimed Lucy had training in karate. Others whispered that she'd been a government spy. The theories grew wilder with each retelling. Lucy found herself at the center of a local legend. Peter tried to shield her from the swirl of gossip, but it was impossible. When Lucy ventured to the general store for supplies, townspeople approached her to say thank you or to pepper her with questions. We hear you were in the military, said one. Is it true you took out 5 men in less than a minute? Asked another. Lucy tried to downplay it, offering vague acknowledgments that she had some military background and that things had escalated unexpectedly. But she could see the curiosity burning in their eyes, fueled by a newfound awe. That Sunday, the community held an impromptu meeting at the church hall. Sheriff Granger, just back in town, was present alongside Deputy Winslow. Even Miss Crisp attended, cane in hand, and there was also a crowd of anxious residents. The question on everyone's mind, Were the rogue riders going to return? If so, how could the town protect itself? Lucy sat near the back with Peter, hoping to keep a low profile. But word had already labeled her the local hero, and it wasn't long before the meeting turned its focus to her. "Mrs. Davids," Sheriff Granger said, clearing his throat, "we all want to know, are we in danger now that those bikers left? Are they going to seek revenge?" He paused, then added, "And how on earth did you learn to fight like that?" The hush that followed his question was profound. Lucy felt 100 pairs of eyes boring into her. She glanced at Peter, who reached for her hand under the table. She steadied herself. The time for partial truths was over. In a measured voice, Lucy explained that she had served in the Navy for 15 years, deployed in some of the toughest environments in the world. She didn't mention the specific Special Operations Unit or the top secret missions in Kandahar, only that she had extensive combat experience. "I wanted a normal life, away from violence," Lucy told the silent crowd. "I came here because this place felt safe. I never intended for my skills to become public knowledge." After she finished, murmurs spread across the hall. Sheriff Granger pressed on. "Your skills may well be the reason we'll stay safe. If these rogue riders come back in force, do you think you can train some of us? Teach us at least the basics of defending ourselves?" A flicker of shock sparked through Lucy, but Ms. Crisp from the front row nodded emphatically. "I've seen what you can do, Lucy. We'd rather learn from someone who's proved herself trustworthy." A moment later, the room erupted into a chorus of agreement. The atmosphere had swung from suspicion to relief, from confusion to hope. Lucy never set out to be a teacher of self-defense or community preparedness. She had spent her first months in Hollow Creek actively trying to forget the high-stakes world she had left behind. But as she glanced around at the earnest, worried faces, she realized she couldn't turn away. These people had embraced her, given her a home. Even after witnessing her lethal side, they did not ostracize her. Instead, they were asking for her guidance to protect themselves and each other. It stirred an old sense of duty within Lucy, one she thought she had buried when she left the Navy. "All right," Lucy finally said to the expectant crowd. "If there's enough interest, I can run a few classes. Not about taking down armed men, necessarily, but about personal safety, awareness, and how to handle confrontation." A hum of excitement and relief passed through the assembly. Within 10 minutes, she was scribbling names of volunteers on a yellow notepad, assisted by Ms. Crisp, who insisted on signing up despite her age. Lucy marveled at the older woman's courage. The very next week, Lucy found herself standing in the community center's multi-purpose room, facing a crowd of about 30. People of all ages had shown up, teenage girls who had heard the story of Lucy's takedown of the bikers and were eager to learn. Middle-aged farmers worried about their families. Ms. Crisp, cane in hand, and even the clergyman, curious to see what defense by Lucy looked like. Peter had helped rearrange the tables and chairs so they could have enough space to move. Sheriff Granger had come too, not to instruct, but to observe and learn. Lucy started with the basics. "Situational awareness is our imam," she said, pacing at the front of the room, "is your first line of defense. Know your exits, watch people's hands and posture, trust your gut." She demonstrated a few simple stances for stable footing. She cautioned them never to seek out danger, but to be ready if it arrived. Her manner of instruction was calm, thorough, much like the way she'd lead a small training unit in her Navy days. Except here, she was more gentle, mindful that she was not dealing with hardened recruits, but everyday folks. The initial sessions were awkward. Lucy was used to trainees who obeyed commands immediately. Civilians needed encouragement, time to understand. Ms. Crisp, for instance, joked that if she couldn't outrun an attacker, she'd whack him with the cane. Lucy smiled and adapted her lesson, showing Ms. Crisp how a cane could indeed be an effective tool in the right hands. Everyone seemed eager but uncertain, a reflection of how the entire community felt. The once peaceful bubble of Hollow Creek had been pierced by the threat of violence. Nobody wanted a pitched battle, but they also refused to be helpless. In the following weeks, attendance grew. Word spread that Lucy's classes were not about aggression, but empowerment. Her emphasis was on preventing a confrontation, recognizing threats early, and responding with minimal force. Meanwhile, Sheriff Granger added extra patrols. Deputy Winslow, no longer so green, practiced some of Lucy's techniques and exuded a new confidence. Even the local high school expressed interest, asking Lucy to adapt her lessons into a safety seminar for students. Gradually, Hollow Creek began to change, from a town wide-eyed in the face of danger to one that believed it could protect itself. As Lucy's self-defense classes took root, Hollow Creek settled back into a rhythm. The Rogue Riders were nowhere to be seen. Some thought they'd simply chosen another town to harass. Others feared they were biding their time. Lucy suspected the latter. Experienced bullies rarely let a humiliating defeat go unanswered. Even so, the weeks stretched on with no sign of Blade or his crew, and the people of Hollow Creek slowly exhaled. Produce stands returned to their usual place in the market. Children once again ran around freely, though with a bit more caution gleaned from Lucy's lessons. Peter noticed subtle shifts in his wife, too. Lucy seemed lighter, less burdened by her past. Teaching the community not only gave her a sense of purpose, but also showed her that she could merge her old life with her new one. Whenever she demonstrated how to escape a wrist grab or how to diffuse a brewing conflict, there was a calm certainty in her eyes. It reminded Peter of the stories she had hinted at, of times she had protected her fellow service members in Afghanistan. But now, instead of deserts and insurgents, she had produced stalls and neighbors. A few curious reporters from a nearby town heard rumors of the market takedown. They tried to spin Lucy's story into a sensational piece about a mystery ex-military woman who pulverized a biker gang. Sheriff Granger managed to keep them at bay, explaining that Lucy and the townspeople just wanted to move on. Lucy avoided interviews altogether. Even Ms. Crisp, who liked to chat, gave them only the barest details, focusing more on how the entire community was learning to be safer. The biggest change, perhaps, was in Ms. Crisp herself. She no longer used her cane as merely a walking aid. After Lucy showed her a few techniques, Mrs. Crisp walked with new confidence, joking that she had a weapon of virtue. The local teenage girls looked to Lucy as a role model, fascinated by her combination of warmth and capability. The older men who might have once scoffed at the idea of being taught by a woman found themselves taking notes during Lucy's sessions. Even Deputy Winslow wasn't shy about admitting Lucy's instructions made him a better officer. It felt like the entire town was rallying behind her. Yet Lucy remained cautious. Late at night, she'd recall the heavy scowl on Blade's face as he left, the way the other bikers gathered behind him. She recognized that methodical look as that of someone accustomed to intimidation, and possibly more. If the Rogue Riders returned, they wouldn't come with a half-baked plan. They'd strike where they believed Lucy and the town were weakest. So Lucy used her classes to discreetly strengthen the market's layout, suggesting reorganization of stalls to allow better lines of sight. She taught vendors to communicate through simple gestures if they spotted suspicious behavior. She introduced methods to handle medical emergencies, roping in Dr. Eddings, the local veterinarian who had some knowledge of trauma care. Week by week, Hollow Creek grew safer, not through a show of arms, but through readiness and community bonds. There was a new sense of camaraderie in the air. Farmers supported each other with shared equipment, neighbors checked on one another, and the old orchard path turned into a place for nightly patrol walks. The warmth of the people had not faded, but under Lucy's guidance, it was now paired with a more vigilant mindset. Just when it seemed the Rogue Riders might be a bad memory, Lucy spotted signs of reconnaissance around the outskirts of Hollow Creek. Late one evening, while returning from a supply run, she noticed unfamiliar tire tracks off a side road leading to a ridge overlooking the town. A vantage point, Lucy thought, where someone could watch the comings and goings unnoticed. She quietly informed Sheriff Granger, who found footprints and discarded cigarette butts in that area, an indication that watchers had been there for some time. Rumors trickled in from neighboring towns of a sudden rise in petty crimes and mysterious accidents that bore the hallmark of intimidation tactics. The pattern felt chillingly familiar to Lucy, reminiscent of the carefully orchestrated campaigns she once saw insurgent groups use in remote villages: terrorize, isolate, and eventually control. Lucy convened a small meeting of key community figures at the multi-purpose room that now served as a makeshift training center. Peter was there, along with Sheriff Granger, Deputy Winslow, Ms. Crisp, Dr. Eddings, and Mark Pollard, a newcomer in town who turned out to be a military veteran from an Army Ranger unit. Mark had recognized Lucy's technique the first time he saw her demonstrate a disarm. After class, he confided he'd served several tours himself. Their shared background allowed Lucy to open up a bit more about her concerns. "I don't think this is just a random gang," Lucy said, her gaze unwavering. "We saw their patch and assumed they were typical biker troublemakers. But what if they're connected to a larger group running rackets in multiple counties? They're too organized. The intimidation campaign is too systematic." Sheriff Granger nodded, arms folded. "I've got contacts in the next county over saying the same thing. Businesses being approached, forced to pay protection money. Those who don't comply get vandalized, or worse." Ms. Crisp tapped her cane thoughtfully. "Then they're coming back. It's just a matter of time." Her tone was more resigned than fearful. Deputy Winslow looked grim. "Even if we call in state troopers, they can't post an officer here 24/7. Mark Pollard leaned forward. "Lucy's training is good, but we might need to up our game. These folks aren't going to rely on subtle intimidation forever. If they decide to make a real statement, they'll come armed and in greater numbers." Lucy surveyed the serious faces around her. "The best defense we have is our unity," she said. "If we show them that we're organized and prepared, we can deter a direct assault. But we need more than basic self-defense training. We need a structured approach. Patrol schedules, communication protocols, contingency plans. We have to protect our families without turning this town into a fortress." She paused, then added with conviction, "We did it once at the market, but next time, they'll be prepared. So we need to be prepared too." The small group agreed to expand their training efforts and organizational structure. Sheriff Granger would handle the legal dimensions, coordinating with county authorities. Deputy Winslow would establish a neighborhood watch system. Ms. Crisp volunteered to head a phone tree, ensuring rapid communication. Mark Pollard offered to help Lucy teach advanced tactics, focusing on group coordination rather than just individual defense. The air in that room crackled with determination. Despite the looming threat, Lucy felt pride in these people who refused to cower, who stood ready to protect one another. This was a different kind of mission. No uniforms, no official chain of command, just a community forging its own shield. Word spread of the enhanced training initiative. Residents who once scoffed at the idea of prepping began showing up for sessions. Families juggled their schedules to attend evening drills, where Lucy and Mark taught them how to secure their homes, communicate during a crisis, and observe suspicious activities without drawing attention. Even the local teens participated, albeit with excited chatter and a few jokes. Lucy had them practice basic first aid, explaining that knowledge could save lives when official help was too far away. Peter played a crucial role, too. He set up a workshop on farm safety that quietly doubled as a crash course in emergency coordination. If the power went out or roads were blocked, the knowledge of how to share resources, keep livestock safe, and manage food supplies could become critical. In Lucy's eyes, Peter's optimism and practicality meshed perfectly with her security-minded approach. He gave neighbors confidence that all these extreme measures were simply a sensible extension of good old-fashioned community care. Meanwhile, Lucy learned more about Mark Pollard's background. He had been part of an Army Ranger unit that specialized in reconnaissance and small group tactics. Like Lucy, he had settled in Hollow Creek to escape the mental toll of continuous deployments. Now, as they discussed possible infiltration routes or improvised alarm systems, Lucy realized how seamlessly their experiences aligned. Mark had never encountered a female operative with Lucy's level of skill, and he occasionally looked at her with the same quiet admiration the rest of Hollow Creek had come to show. As the final piece of their plan, Lucy proposed a series of silent signals and coded phrases that vendors at the market could use to indicate threats. Each stand had a designated vantage point. Ms. Crisp, enthroned near the baked goods, acted as a subtle sentinel. Even Dr. Eddings got involved, explaining how certain catheters and bandages could be used in makeshift medical emergencies if the local clinic was overwhelmed. Despite the seriousness of their preparations, Hollow Creek retained its warmth. Classes ended in potluck dinners, neighbors swapped canning recipes, and there was a tangible sense that they were strengthening bonds rather than living in fear. Lucy felt the shift acutely. For the first time since leaving the Navy, She wasn't just escaping her past. She was using it for a constructive purpose. The community was transforming into a place where security came not from barbed wire or locked doors, but from collective vigilance and training. Still, Lucy had a gnawing tension in the pit of her stomach. The absence of the rogue riders did not sit well with her. Through the local grapevine, they heard rumblings of trouble in nearby areas. A diner vandalized when the owner refused to pay protection fees. A family terrorized on a remote farm. Each incident seemed to follow a pattern, ramping up until the victims gave in or were driven out of business. Lucy knew it was only a matter of time before Blade brought that campaign back to Hollow Creek with renewed determination. The best she could do was keep teaching, keep organizing, and hope their unity would be enough when the storm finally hit. Trouble returned to Hollow Creek in the form of a chilly morning wind and the echo of distant motorcycles. It had been weeks since Lucy and her small team detected signs of surveillance in the hills, and the community had continued fortifying its defenses, both physical and psychological. But no amount of preparation completely erased the tension, that collective tightening of breath every time a roar of engines was heard in the distance. Sure enough, at dawn on a Monday, a local farmer reported that a few suspicious figures on motorcycles had been seen near the largest grain silo on the western edge of town. Fearing arson or vandalism, he had called Deputy Winslow, who in turn alerted Lucy and Mark. By the time Lucy arrived at the silo with her makeshift security squad, a blend of trained neighbors and volunteers, the riders were gone, leaving behind fresh tire marks gouged into the dirt. The sight alone set everyone on edge. "They're testing us," Mark observed, scanning the horizon for any sign of watchers. "Looking for weaknesses." That afternoon, Ms. Crisp organized an emergency meeting at the community center. The room buzzed with anxious chatter. People asked if they should board up their shops or move livestock. Others wondered if calling in the National Guard was an option. Sheriff Granger did his best to allay fear, reminding everyone that no laws had been overtly broken yet, and that local law enforcement was coordinating with nearby counties for backup. But Lucy knew the real advantage lay in the training they had established, not in distant agencies. She stood at the front of the room, her usual gentle smile replaced by a look of quiet determination. "I don't want anyone to panic," she said, projecting her voice across the worried faces. "But I do want everyone to be on high alert. We don't know their exact plan, but we do know they're not here for a friendly chat. If we keep our eyes open, follow our protocols, and communicate, we can stay one step ahead." Peter, standing beside Lucy, explained the measures they were putting into immediate effect. Vendors would end their market day an hour earlier until further notice. Volunteer patrols would coordinate with Deputy Winslow for rotating night watch shifts. Certain roads would be blocked off at night, forcing any visiting vehicles through a single checkpoint manned by local volunteers trained to document license plates and rider descriptions. Although some townspeople expressed fears that this made Hollow Creek look like a military camp, most recognized the necessity. In a quieter corner of the room, Lucy overheard a cluster of older residents talking in hushed voices about calling in men with bigger guns. She understood the temptation to escalate force, but large-scale firepower or martial presence risked turning the town into a war zone. The entire premise of her approach was to avoid open conflict unless absolutely necessary. Peace could be preserved, she believed, if they stayed disciplined and unified. Before the meeting concluded, Lucy reiterated a crucial point. These biker gangs operate by fear. They want communities to feel isolated and helpless so they can demand money or compliance. "We've come too far to be intimidated. Stay vigilant and stick together." The crowd dispersed with a mixture of determination and residual worry, ready to face whatever might come with a steady front. That same evening, a light drizzle turned the road slick. The volunteer patrol assigned to the main checkpoint included Mark Pollard, Ms. Crisp, who insisted on taking a shift despite everyone's protests, and two high school seniors named Liam and Margot. Both teens had been among Lucy's earliest students, drawn by the excitement of learning real self-defense skills. Yet tonight, their usual youthful enthusiasm showed cracks of nerves. Margot fiddled with the radio, glancing at the dark stretch of highway that disappeared into the horizon. Liam clutched a flashlight and a notepad to record plate numbers. Mark taught them what he'd learned in the military about standing watch. Keep warm, rotate tasks, and stay alert without letting the mind drift. Ms. Crisp, cane in hand, provided a steady presence. Whenever one of the teens admitted to feeling anxious, she offered a reassuring smile. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid, she would say gently. It just means you show up anyway. Around midnight, headlights appeared at the far end of the road. Tension climbed. Was it the rogue riders or just a passing driver? Mark signaled for everyone to remain calm but ready. The vehicle turned out to be a local pickup truck. Inside were two farmers returning from an auction in a nearby county. After checking in and exchanging a few words, they carried on, leaving the patrol in the steady drizzle once more. By 2 a.m. on a.m., the teens were yawning, leaning against the side of a makeshift booth they'd set up. Ms. Crisp sipped from a thermos of hot tea. Mark paced around, scanning the wet road with each pass. Then, without warning, 4 pairs of motorcycle headlights materialized in the distance, speeding toward them. Liam and Margot tensed, stepping closer together. Ms. Crisp squared her shoulders. Mark motioned for them to remain behind the booth. He stood in full view, arms relaxed at his sides but posture alert. The roar of engines drew closer, echoing off the surrounding fields. The bikes slowed as they approached the checkpoint. 4 riders with matching vests, each bearing the snarling wolf's head patch of the rogue riders. None wore helmets, their faces visible in the glaring lights of the booth's lantern. One was missing an eye, replaced by a milky scar, a detail that unsettled Liam, who stared in frozen fascination. Another had a jagged tattoo across his jaw. They reeked of aggression, but Mark met their gazes, forcing himself to appear unflinching. "Evening," Mark said calmly, raising his voice over the rain and engines. "Town's enforcing a checkpoint policy. Need you fellas to state your business." The lead rider, a wiry man with a grin that looked more like a snarl, revved his engine. He exchanged a glance with the scar-faced rider, then let out a bark of laughter. "Our business is our own," he replied, his voice dripping with contempt. "Now get out of our way before we run you down." Mark's heartbeat hammered, but he kept his composure. He'd seen far worse in remote war zones. The question was whether these bikers would try to barrel through the checkpoint. With Ms. Crisp and 2 teens present, a direct confrontation could be dangerous. He recalled Lucy's training: de-escalate if possible, but show no sign of capitulation. "We've got folks behind us ready to call law enforcement," Mark warned. "If you plan to come in peace, that's one thing, but you won't find an easy mark here." The moment stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Rain pattered on the bikers' leather jackets, and the distant rumble of thunder added a menacing undercurrent. The lead rider, still sneering, tapped the brim of his vest. "We're just paying a social visit," he said sarcastically. "Heard Hollow Creek's become real unfriendly to outsiders, especially ones with bikes. Thought we'd see for ourselves." Mark took a step forward, making sure to block their view of Ms. Crisp and the teens. "Then turn around," he said. "We're not interested in whatever trouble you're selling." The scar-faced rider revved his engine, edging closer. For a split second, Mark believed they might test him, try to push through physically, but the lead rider gestured for the others to hold back. He flicked his gaze down to Mark's stance, the subtle readiness that indicated training, then to the radio in Margot's hand. The biker likely deduced that a single shot or phone call could bring half the town down on them in minutes. Reluctantly, he nodded to his companions. One by one, they revved their engines in protest, then turned their bikes around and roared back into the darkness. Only when their taillights vanished did Mark allow himself a low exhale. "That was close," Liam muttered, his breath shaky. Margot nodded, rubbing her arms against the cold. Ms. Crisp took a step forward, her cane crunching against the wet gravel. "You all handled that well," she said softly, eyes flicking to Mark with gratitude. "Could have ended badly, but they saw we weren't scared enough to fold." Even as relief washed over them, Mark recognized the encounter for what it was: a test. The rogue riders weren't launching their full assault yet. They were probing defenses, gauging responses. Likely they would regroup, feed information to Blade, or whichever higher up was orchestrating these intimidation tactics, and come back stronger. Meanwhile, Miss Crisp radioed Lucy, calmly describing what had happened. Lucy, upon hearing about the confrontation, ordered a swift reorganization of the next night's patrols. If the riders planned a return visit, they'd find more volunteers standing watch. By dawn, word of the checkpoint standoff had circulated through the entire town. People approached Mark, Ms. Crisp, Liam, and Margot to thank them for holding the line. Some were emboldened by the show of resolve. Others felt fresh tremors of fear, realizing the riders were no mere shadow. But the net effect was to reinforce Lucy's call for unity. If the riders expected a fractured, fearful community, they would be disappointed. When Lucy arrived at the checkpoint site to relieve the night team, she found Mark still there, exhaustion etched into his face. "Get some rest," she told him gently. "We'll rotate squads, everyone stepping up." Mark nodded, though worry clouded his eyes. "This was just a preview," he said. "They'll be back with more bikes, more muscle. We both know it." Lucy touched his shoulder in understanding. "Then we'll be ready," she said. In that moment, the shared sense of responsibility bound them tighter. Hollow Creek wasn't just defending buildings or farmland. It was defending the spirit of a town that believed in caring for its own without succumbing to fear. For Lucy, it reinforced why she'd chosen to share her skill set at all. In unity, they had a chance. As the days passed, the tension around Hollow Creek escalated. Peter noticed more stolen glances among neighbors, more hushed conversations in the aisles of the general store. The volunteer patrols expanded, with nearly a dozen townsfolk rotating through the night shifts. Farmers took to locking barns earlier, reinforcing gates, and keeping flashlights and radios at hand. Children were given stricter curfews, something that caused frustration, but also gave them a sense of the gravity of the situation. Lucy spent her waking hours fine-tuning their response plans. She walked each perimeter with Mark, identifying spots where an attacker might try to slip past. Dr. Eddings assembled an expanded medical kit at the community center, preparing for worst-case scenarios. Ms. Crisp recruited a team of phone tree operators, mostly older residents who stayed up late, to ensure that if trouble surfaced, half the town would know within minutes. Every so often, Lucy's thoughts drifted to her old Navy life. The parallels were striking: routine patrols, intelligence gathering, possible engagements with hostile forces. Except here, she wasn't leading a specialized military unit. She was guiding farmers, shop owners, teens, and seniors. Yet the sense of camaraderie felt equally strong. In her Navy days, Lucy had seen how well a unified team could withstand threats. She clung to that belief now. Meanwhile, the rogue riders seemed to vanish as suddenly as they'd appeared at the checkpoint, at least to the untrained eye. Lucy suspected they were reconnoitering from a safe distance. She encouraged local hunters to report any unusual sightings in the woods. A few came back with stories of tire tracks and trampled undergrowth, but no direct encounters. One evening, Sheriff Granger and Deputy Winslow visited Lucy at the farm. They sat around the modest kitchen table, sipping coffee while Peter paced about, listening. The sheriff admitted he'd called in a favor from a friend in the state police, but the response was lukewarm. "They're stretched thin," Granger explained. "They can dispatch a unit if a major incident happens, but they won't station troopers here full-time." Lucy mulled that over. "So we're on our own, more or less." She wasn't surprised. Her mind went to worst-case scenarios. The riders might attempt a show of force, blocking off the highway, vandalizing major buildings, or even setting fire to the market if they felt brazen enough. She hoped their fortifications, coupled with the deterrent of an organized town, would stave off a large-scale confrontation. Deputy Winslow set down his coffee. "If they come back in big numbers, we might not be able to control the situation without backup. Our best shot is to keep them from rallying that many people here in the first place." Lucy nodded in agreement. Fearful towns often capitulate quickly to demands. But Hollow Creek, with its newly discovered backbone, was unlikely to cave, which meant the riders might escalate. Before the sheriff and deputy left, Lucy tapped a small notebook on the table. "I've noted each suspicious sighting, plus potential infiltration routes. If you see any patterns, let me know." She handed them the book. Sheriff Granger looked at her with a blend of admiration and concern. "You remind me more of a field commander than a farmer's wife, Lucy." She managed a smile tinged with sadness. "Sometimes I wish I could just be the farmer's wife. But we can't choose when trouble comes to our door." As if on cue, trouble arrived in the dead of a moonless night. Past 2 a.m., the North Patrol, consisting of two local brothers, Sam and Josh Wheeler, reported multiple motorcycles speeding toward the old Orchard Road. Lucy, half asleep, jolted upright when her radio crackled. "We count at least 8 bikes," Sam's voice said, tension evident. "They're heading for the center of town, maybe the market or the community center." Lucy raced to her truck, throwing on a jacket and boots. Peter stood at the door, clutching a flashlight. "I'll come with you," he insisted. Lucy hesitated. On one hand, she wanted him safe. On the other, Peter was a familiar face to the townspeople. His presence might help calm nerves. "All right," she relented. "Let's go." By the time they reached the main street, Ms. Crisp had already triggered the phone tree, and a few hurriedly dressed volunteers were emerging from homes. Deputy Winslow arrived with lights flashing, though sirens off, to avoid panic. Lucy signaled for the deputy to coordinate with Mark, who was racing up from another patrol route. The plan was to funnel the bikers into a well-lit zone by the market, where they would find themselves confronted not by a handful of frightened civilians, but by a prepared, watchful gathering. Sure enough, the roar of engines split the air. A swarm of headlights approached from the Orchard Road. Lucy stood near the produce stalls, floodlights activated, arms folded. The air smelled of cold metal and damp pavement. Peter hovered at her side, hands trembling slightly around his radio. Ms. Crisp stayed off to one side, determined to watch. Mark and Sheriff Granger positioned themselves strategically to block any potential retreat. 9 riders this time. At the front was Blade, recognizable from the Rogue Rider's first visit, a deep scowl etched on his rugged face. Lucy caught the glint of firearms strapped to at least 2 of the men. They slowed, engines revving ominously. The entire market was illuminated in a harsh electric glow, making each confrontation line starkly visible. Hollow Creek's watchers, maybe 20 in total, stood behind makeshift barricades formed from tables and crates. Blade killed his engine and dismounted, the others following suit. Nobody spoke for a long, tense moment. The only sound was the ticking of hot metal cooling on the bikes. Lucy heard her own heartbeat echo in her ears, a drumbeat of adrenaline she hadn't felt since her last mission overseas. A memory flashed, a standoff at a dusty checkpoint in Kandahar. She pushed it aside. Finally, Blade broke the silence. "Heard you formed yourselves some kind of militia," he sneered, gaze locking on Lucy. "Everyone here's got illusions of being a hero now." Lucy didn't rise to the bait. "We protect our own," she said calmly. "Your threats won't work." Blade's sneer widened into a cruel grin. "Really? Because I hear you're a former Navy something or other living out here pretending to be a nobody. Figure we teach you a lesson about how that doesn't cut it in real life." He glanced around at the townspeople. "All you folks can't possibly think you can keep us out forever." Lucy felt her posture tighten. "We're not here to fight if we don't have to, but we won't let you bully us." She projected her voice so everyone could hear. "You're free to leave. That would be the wise choice." The second Lucy spoke those words, several of the bikers shifted, hands resting on weapons or crossing arms in menacing stances. They radiated confidence, sure that their numbers and intimidation would force Hollow Creek to buckle. But Lucy detected something else in their eyes, a hint of uncertainty. After all, few small towns responded with this level of coordination. Usually gangs like the Rogue Riders faced only a handful of armed locals who were easily overwhelmed. "You sure you want to do this, lady?" Blade asked, pulling his jacket aside to reveal a holstered pistol. His men, emboldened, made similar displays, letting the glint of metal or the coil of chain show. A murmur ran through the watchers. Ms. Crisp's hand tightened on her cane. Peter swallowed hard next to Lucy but stood firm. Sheriff Granger cleared his throat. "You're trespassing with intent to intimidate. If you don't leave now, we have cause to detain you." Blade threw his head back in a barking laugh. "Detain us? With what, your pitchforks and flashlights?" His voice dripped contempt, but Lucy noticed he hadn't drawn his pistol, and that was telling. If he believed they were completely defenseless, he'd have gone for more direct violence. Lucy stepped forward, leaving the makeshift barricade. She held her hands loosely at her sides, no weapon drawn. "No one wants bloodshed," she said, locking eyes with Blade. "I've lived with it for too long, but you're not going to extort or terrorize this community. We're prepared to defend ourselves." Her calm, measured tone only seemed to inflame Blade. He spat on the ground. You think your little fighting tricks will stop us? He jerked a thumb at his men. We've taken on bigger towns, bigger cops. You're nothing. Lucy held his gaze, recalling every instance in her life when someone underestimated her because of her body shape or because she was a woman. The ghost of a smirk touched her lips. Underestimating me in this town was your first mistake. The tension broke when one of the more hot-headed bikers lunged forward, a chain swinging from his hand. Sheriff Granger yelled for him to freeze, but Lucy moved first. With reflexes honed through countless drills, she sidestepped and locked the chain wielder's arm, flipping him to the ground with a practiced maneuver. Another rider drew a knife, rushing from Lucy's blind spot, but Mark intercepted with a tackle that knocked the knife skittering across the asphalt. The watchers roared in alarm, some backing away, others stepping forward in an attempt to help. Chaos threatened to engulf the square. Engines revved as a few bikers who hadn't dismounted tried to maneuver their bikes menacingly. Ms. Crisp rapped her cane against the ground, shouting for the crowd to hold positions and not panic. Deputy Winslow and the Wheeler brothers moved in a coordinated pattern, forming a defensive line. Lucy disarmed the chain wielder, twisting the links from his grasp and pinning him, while Blade seethed, reaching for his pistol. In that crucial instant, Lucy locked eyes with him, mentally preparing to neutralize the threat. It was as if time slowed. She knew if Blade managed to get off a shot, even just one, the entire situation could become a bloodbath. Her body tensed like a coiled spring, the memory of insurgent firefights flaring behind her eyes. She had left that life once, but now war had found her on her own hometown streets. Just as Blade's hand curled around his pistol grip, a sharp whistle cut through the din. Ms. Crisp, of all people, had stepped forward, cane raised. Her frail figure seemed almost laughable, but she commanded the moment with surprising authority. "You shoot," she said, voice trembling with both anger and resolve. "And half this town will have you in handcuffs before you can blink. We've seen war, young man, and we're not afraid of you." The sheer audacity of the elderly woman confronting him gave Blade pause. In that heartbeat of hesitation, Lucy acted. She lunged forward, closing the gap with a burst of speed that defied her size. Her hand clamped down on Blade's wrist, forcing the gunman upward. The shot went wide, blasting into the night sky with an ear-shattering crack. Screams erupted. A few watchers ducked for cover, but Lucy kept hold of Blade's arm. The recoil jarred her elbow, but she bore through the pain, twisting until the pistol clattered onto the pavement. Blade's eyes bulged with fury as he attempted to yank free. Lucy brought her knee up, hooking his leg and sending him off balance. For a moment, she had the advantage, but the surrounding riders noticed their leader in trouble. Two of them converged on Lucy, fists swinging. She braced for impact, but Mark and Deputy Winslow intercepted, grappling the bikers away. Meanwhile, Peter, who'd been near the barricade, rushed in to help Lucy subdue Blade. With a growl that seemed more animal than human, Blade tried to break free. Lucy recognized the signs of a man who'd rely on brute force over technique. She shifted her stance, controlling his center of gravity. Behind them, the watchers began shouting instructions. Ms. Crisp warned people to keep a safe distance. Mark radioed for backup, though Lucy doubted state police would arrive in time to matter. Some of the other riders tried to mount their bikes and flee, only to realize the makeshift barricades and prepared watchers blocked the exit. A handful fled on foot, disappearing into the darkness. Finally, with Peter's help, Lucy pinned Blade on the ground, twisting his arm behind his back. His breath came in ragged bursts, spitting curses. Lucy's heart pounded so loudly she could scarcely hear. This was too close to the lethal violence she'd left behind. She felt an old, familiar sensation rising, a controlled ferocity that once allowed her to survive covert missions. But she hadn't crossed that line here, nor did she want to. She forced herself to loosen her grip slightly as soon as she was sure Blade wouldn't break free. Gradually, the chaos died down. One by one, the remaining bikers were forced to surrender or were caught by volunteer squads. The watchers, though terrified, had followed Lucy's training. Some administered first aid to minor injuries. Others secured the perimeter. Ms. Crisp and Dr. Eddings, shaky but resolute, moved from person to person, ensuring no one was badly hurt. Sheriff Granger and Deputy Winslow, breathless but uninjured, began cuffing the subdued riders, reading them their rights in shaky voices that still carried authority. Lucy stood panting as Peter hovered protectively at her side. She gazed around at the aftermath, scattered produce crates, a broken stall, a few bruised watchers, and 8 disarmed angry bikers. Blade glared at her from the ground, but there was something else in his eyes. Shock. Shock that a sleepy farm town had bested him. It was over, at least for now. In the days that followed, Hollow Creek found itself at the center of a whirlwind of outside attention. The dramatic standoff had resulted in several arrests, including Blade and his top lieutenants. The state police finally arrived in the aftermath, carting the handcuffed bikers away and congratulating the locals on a courageous defense. Reporters from nearby towns re-emerged, some capturing footage of overturned stalls and bullet holes in wooden signs. A few nights later, local news channels carried the story of how a mysterious ex-military woman and her neighbors stood off a biker gang. For Lucy, the spotlight was more uncomfortable than any physical confrontation. She found herself fielding interview requests, though she turned most down. The few she couldn't avoid, she kept short. "We did what any community would do if they valued their safety," she told one persistent journalist. She resisted any attempt to make her look like a lone hero, emphasizing that everyone, from Ms. Crisp to Mark Pollard, had played a crucial role. Sheriff Granger had to deal with the legal aftermath, coordinating with the district attorney. Charges ranged from trespassing and assault to attempted murder for Blade, who had fired the shot. When questioned by officials, Lucy provided a clear, concise account. The district attorney, initially skeptical that a group of civilians had apprehended armed criminals, became a believer after seeing the evidence and hearing consistent testimonies about the training Lucy had led. "We've never seen a town so organized," he remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. Despite the sense of relief that the immediate threat seemed contained, Lucy couldn't entirely relax. The rest of the rogue riders or affiliated gangs might retaliate. After all, Blade was just one cell leader in a broader network. But intelligence from the neighboring counties suggested the blow to Blade's crew sent shockwaves through the entire group. Other criminal elements were backing off, wary of a place where even the local seniors refused to be cowed. Hollow Creek itself underwent a subtle transformation in the aftermath. People who had once hesitated to attend Lucy's sessions now flooded them. They asked about advanced medical training, disaster preparedness, and how to spot lesser-known threats like cyber scams. It was as though the confrontation with the rogue riders had awakened a collective determination not just to defend their town, but to enhance every facet of community life. Peter started offering free workshops on sustainable farming methods, explaining that food security could be part of resilience. Dr. Eddings taught pet owners basic veterinary triage in case of future emergencies. Ms. Crisp, with her indomitable spirit, formed a seniors watch group that patrolled with the golf carts during daylight hours, reporting anything out of the ordinary. Amid this upswing in civic engagement, Lucy found herself feeling lighter than she ever had since leaving the Navy. For so long, she feared that her combat skills were a burden, a relic of a violent past. But here she had seen them merge with the gentle rhythms of farming life to create something positive. That synergy was best illustrated by the day's final market after the arrests. Farmers sold produce, children played, and watchers kept a discreet eye on everything. All remained calm, and Lucy dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, Hollow Creek could return to the peace it deserved, while retaining the strength to keep that peace intact. Summer turned to autumn, and the leaves in Hollow Creek changed to brilliant oranges and reds. The recent confrontation with the Rogue Riders felt almost surreal in the crisp morning air, as though it had been a collective bad dream. Yet tangible reminders remained: a bullet hole patched in a market stall, a few boarded-up windows replaced with fresh glass, and the ever-watchful eyes of neighbors who no longer took safety for granted. The county officials, impressed by how Hollow Creek had organized its defense, invited Lucy to speak at a regional forum on community preparedness. Lucy was initially reluctant. She'd never sought the spotlight, and her confidence in front of the townspeople stemmed from familiarity, not a desire to lecture strangers. But Peter gently encouraged her, arguing that other small communities could benefit from what Hollow Creek had learned. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Think of how many places out there face the same threats without the skills or unity we have, he said. You can help them. So Lucy traveled to the county seat, accompanied by Mark, Sheriff Granger, and Ms. Crisp, who insisted on tagging along for moral support. The forum was held in a modest government building, its beige walls decorated with motivational posters about emergency management. A smattering of officials from nearby towns showed up. Police chiefs, mayors, even a couple of volunteer firefighters. Lucy felt butterflies in her stomach as she approached the podium, wearing a simple blouse and slacks instead of her usual apron or field gear. Her talk was straightforward. She described how Hollow Creek had faced a series of escalating threats, how they'd recognized the necessity of structured training and communication, and how they'd formed a cohesive network of vigilance without turning into a paramilitary force. We didn't want fear to rule our town, she said, glancing at Ms. Crisp in the front row. We just wanted to be prepared. The room fell silent as she recounted the final confrontation. She downplayed her own role, emphasizing how the entire community, young, old, farmers, shop owners, came together. Mark stepped forward to highlight the volunteer patrols, the checkpoint strategy, and the quick medical response. Sheriff Granger chimed in about the importance of bridging law enforcement with civilian initiatives, praising Lucy's approach of defense through unity. When they finished, the audience peppered them with questions about implementation details, funding, and legal considerations. Lucy answered patiently, supported by Ms. Crisp's anecdotes about the phone tree and community watch. By the end, the forum's organizer declared that more towns needed a Lucy Davids, a sentiment echoed in repeated applause. Lucy, flushing slightly, insisted, "You don't need me. You just need the will to organize and train, and leaders with a heart for the community." The drive back to Hollow Creek felt triumphant but reflective. Lucy realized that, in a way, she had found a new mission, one of empowerment rather than pure defense. Peter, noting her thoughtful expression, squeezed her hand. "You're doing real good here," he said quietly. Lucy smiled. "I'm just glad to see our little town's spirit spreading." The training programs in Hollow Creek soon evolved beyond self-defense and night patrols. Inspired by the Autumn Forum, residents dove into broader resilience efforts. Some learned advanced first aid. Others figured out how to establish backup power sources in case of a major outage. A few teamed up with local businesses to create a rotating system of emergency stockpiles. Hollow Creek was quickly becoming a microcosm of coordinated preparedness, what some outsiders half-jokingly called the fortress in the valley, though Lucy disliked the militaristic implication. One crisp November afternoon, Lucy stood at the edge of the orchard with Mark, surveying the neat rows of trees shedding fiery leaves. "We've come a long way, haven't we, Mark?" Mark said, leaning against a fence post. Lucy nodded, remembering how, just months ago, they'd raced through this orchard in the dark to intercept the rogue riders. It's incredible to see folks forging these connections. They're not just learning to fight, they're learning to protect each other in all kinds of crises. Even Ms. Crisp had expanded her role from sentinel to community educator, hosting informal seminars on life skills that doubled as readiness training, teaching families how to store extra provisions, properly manage medications, and create contingency plans for storms or medical emergencies. Meanwhile, Dr. Eddings organized regular medical drills. "We need to be ready for anything," she declared, recalling how chaotic the final standoff had been. Peter dedicated part of his farmland for community gardens, explaining that if the town ever faced supply chain disruptions, they could at least feed themselves. Lucy was struck by how the line between typical farm chores and security measures had blurred. Simple acts like planting root vegetables or repairing fences had taken on new significance in a community determined never again to feel helpless. Most evenings, Lucy and Peter would stroll through the market square, the same place that once turned into a battlefield. Now it hummed with renewed vitality. Children ran around, couples shared homemade pastries, and vendors touted winter produce. Lucy observed the subtle changes. Miss Crisp, cane in hand, discreetly took laps around the perimeter, greeting everyone while keeping an eye on strangers. High schoolers, once bashful about town stuff, now eagerly volunteered for watch shifts or medical classes. Still, Lucy remained vigilant. She knew from experience that threats don't simply vanish because you're prepared, But living in perpetual fear was not the answer. In her Navy days, Lucy had seen entire regions succumb to a siege mentality. Hollow Creek demonstrated a different path, robust readiness paired with a commitment to normal life. Every now and then, Lucy would find a quiet spot, a barn loft or the orchard's old well, and reflect on how far she had come from the battle-scarred nights in Kandahar. Here, she had taken that training and woven it into the gentle tapestry of rural community living. One evening after a dinner of fresh squash stew, Lucy and Peter sat on their porch swing. The sky was a deep violet, stars prickling through the dusk. "You know," Peter said, "I used to worry about you leaving your old life behind, but maybe you never had to leave it. Maybe you just had to transform it." Lucy took his hand, warmth flooding her chest. "I think you're right, and I think Hollow Creek gave me that chance." Winter descended upon the valley, dusting Hollow Creek in a powdery snow that glistened under streetlights. The temperature drop brought new challenges: icy roads, frozen pipes, and the threat of blizzards that could isolate the town. But after everything they had faced, residents approached winter preparedness with remarkable coordination. They salted sidewalks collectively, stockpiled firewood for elderly neighbors, and organized roving snow teams to help clear driveways. Lucy marveled at how the same energy once poured into staving off bikers now manifested in ensuring nobody froze alone in their home. The town's transformation drew the attention of neighboring communities, some of which struggled with petty crime or inadequate infrastructure. Slowly, small delegations arrived, curious to see how Hollow Creek handled security and communal issues. Lucy, though never fond of public speaking, conducted informal tours. She'd show visitors the Orchard Road checkpoint, now mostly unused but kept in working condition for emergencies. She'd invite them to observe Ms. Crisp's phone tree in action, or watch Mark demonstrate home fortification techniques that didn't rely on heavy weaponry. At first, some outsiders expressed skepticism. "Aren't you just turning this place into a fortress?" one township official asked. Lucy responded gently, "A fortress keeps everyone out. We're finding ways to welcome people while making sure they don't exploit our openness." The official left with visible admiration for how the community's sense of unity thrived and alongside its vigilance. Lucy also noticed personal transformations within Hollow Creek. People who once doubted their own capabilities discovered new talents. A shy mother of two proved adept at logistics, scheduling patrols and supply distribution with the efficiency of a military quartermaster. A retired engineer found fulfillment in rigging solar-powered backup lights for strategic corners of town. Even the teenagers, once fixated on their phones, embraced hands-on training, learning to navigate by map and compass when a blizzard or emergency cut power. Lucy took pride in every success story, feeling that her own journey had been worthwhile. Meanwhile, law enforcement around the county updated Lucy and Sheriff Granger on the Rogue Riders. Blade and his top cronies remained in custody, awaiting trial on multiple felony counts. The state police noted that the broader biker network had not tried to break them out or retaliate. It seemed the group had retreated, redirecting efforts elsewhere, away from Hollow Creek's watchful eyes and strong defenses. Lucy believed they might still lurk at the edges, but their appetite for a direct confrontation appeared sated. Winter's darkest nights often found Lucy perched by her living room window, sipping hot tea. She'd scan the snow-covered street, reflecting on how each glow of a street lamp now symbolized more than just illumination. It was a beacon of solidarity. The house next door, the farm across the way, the volunteer patrolling with a flashlight in hand, each was a thread in a tapestry of mutual protection. She'd watch Peter doze in the recliner, and her heart brimmed with gratitude that they'd found a place where she could be both soldier and nurturer, past and present in harmony. In the hush of falling snow, Lucy understood she had forged not just a safer community, but also a safer sense of self. The turning point came in early spring. The snows had barely melted when Hollow Creek received an unexpected invitation: a statewide summit on community-led security and preparedness. Organized by a coalition of local governments, the summit aimed to gather rural towns that had faced or anticipated security challenges. Sheriff Granger, Ms. Crisp, and Lucy were all named as panel speakers. At first, Lucy felt a flicker of anxiety. Public recognition on this scale wasn't something she had ever sought. But the urging of Peter, Mark, and the rest of the town's folks convinced her to accept. The summit took place in the capital, a bustling city that felt worlds away from the quiet lanes of Hollow Creek. Delegates from over a dozen communities attended, sharing a wide spectrum of concerns: drug trafficking on back roads, extremist groups, natural disasters, and more. Lucy, wearing a modest blazer over a simple dress, stood out in a lineup of officials who wore polished suits and carried sleek briefcases. She felt a pang of imposter syndrome until Ms. Crisp gave her a reassuring nod, cane in hand, posture proud. When Lucy took the stage, she didn't launch into a dramatic recounting of the standoff with the Rogue Riders. Instead, she painted a broader picture. "I served in the Navy for 15 years, she began, her voice steady. "I saw how resilience isn't about having the biggest weapons or the toughest walls. It's about people. People willing to learn, adapt, and stand together." She talked about how Hollow Creek had taken simple steps: reorganizing a market, training in basic first aid, establishing watch protocols, and woven them into a powerful tapestry of defense. Mark and Ms. Crisp then elaborated on how they overcame fear and skepticism within the town. Their testimonies resonated with the audience, many of whom faced similar cultural barriers. Questions poured in from every corner of the auditorium. A sheriff from a desert county asked how they kept vigilant without overstepping citizens' freedoms. An urban council member wondered if a similar approach could work in dense neighborhoods. Lucy answered thoughtfully, drawing on the principle that any community, large or small, could harness local talents and solidarity. "We built from what was already there, neighbors looking out for neighbors, and gave it structure," she explained. By the summit's end, Hollow Creek's model emerged as a blueprint, not a rigid template, but an adaptable set of principles to guide others. Lucy found herself speaking to smaller clusters of officials who requested more details, everything from budget considerations to how they balanced daily life with volunteer duties. Ms. Crisp basked in the attention, cheerfully describing how the phone tree doubled as a social check-in for lonely seniors. Mark demonstrated quick weapon disarm maneuvers to officers who only knew standard policing techniques. Returning home, Lucy felt a deep sense of peace, the synergy she'd longed for, where her military past and her quiet agrarian present could coexist, was no longer a private feat. Hollow Creek had proven that a community could be fiercely protective without losing its welcoming soul. And the proof was traveling across the state, maybe even the nation, through officials and towns eager to replicate their success. The next week, as Lucy and Peter strolled through the reopened spring market, life felt almost normal. Vendors set out fresh strawberries, children bounded across the grass, and Ms. Crisp gossiping with neighbors about the best jam recipe. Yet Lucy sensed a deeper change. No longer was she the woman hiding her lethal training behind a produce stand, nor was she just the ghost of her old Navy self. She stood firmly in the present, a guardian of her town's peace, a teacher to those who wish to learn, and a beloved wife with new possibilities on the horizon. That evening, while planting seeds in the warm soil, Lucy heard the distant purr of a single motorcycle passing on the highway. Her spine tingled momentarily, a reflex from the old days, before she felt Peter's reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're okay now," he murmured. She nodded, exhaling. Hollow Creek had not just survived an ordeal, it had emerged stronger, an example of what could happen when ordinary people combined resilience, kindness, and courage. In the end, Lucy realized her greatest victory wasn't in besting a biker gang. It was in discovering that a simple farm town could embrace all of her, her strength and her warmth, and in turn, blossom into a haven that refused to bend under menace. The seeds of unity she had planted would grow, season after season, ensuring that Hollow Creek's fields and hearts remained fertile ground for hope. And if ever another shadow darkened their doorstep, they would stand ready together. Looking back, it's amazing to see how Lucy's past, once a source of hidden pain, became the key to saving Hollow Creek. From defending the produce stand to training her new friends, she discovered that strength and kindness can grow side by side. In the end, the community stood tall, proving that ordinary folks can achieve extraordinary things when they stand together. I hope you've enjoyed following Lucy's journey of courage, hope, and transformation. If this story touched your heart, or sparked ideas about unity and resilience, please drop a comment below. Let's keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll always be first in line for more uplifting, action-packed stories. Thank you for being part of this adventure.